Hey gang, Phil Lister here with another action-packed, fun-filled tutorial from Lister Model Works. As you may recall, in my last video, I did a review of the new Glenn Strange as Frankenstein resin kit by Kit Kong Model Mansion. It's a 1/5 scale resin kit that is absolutely awesome. If you're a Frankenstein fan and a Glenn Strange fan as the monster, this kit is for you. Glenn Strange was a cowboy actor in the 30s and 40s. However, he is best known for two roles, that of Sam the bartender on the show Gunsmoke, and as the Frankenstein monster. Strange played the monster in 3 of Universal's films: House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and of course, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I decided to begin with the base. So here's the base with the steps glued to the actual base itself. And I figured by starting with the base, this way I have a good foundation, someplace I can set the figure once the figure is completed. What I actually started to do first was I wanted to make 2 new posts. If you take a look from a frame from the movie, the posts are rather tall compared to the parts that actually come with the kit itself. The actual resin pieces, as you can see here, are much shorter. So I decided to use some balsa foam, and I literally carved the grain into the new parts, and then I put little wire hooks that I could then attach the chain to. And I think they turned out actually rather well. This was actually my first time working with balsa foam, so I simply took a file, a rounded tip file, and I simply started by scribing lines through the foam, and then I simply went in between those lines and so on. So you can see here the detailing is actually much crisper on the balsa foam parts than on the resin parts themselves. The only thing is, of course, I don't have the little rings, but frankly the little rings are a little bit inaccurate if you take a look at the still from the movie. Now the other problem I had with this kit, which was minor, was that the neck bolts were not really symmetrical. The one bolt wasn't cast completely, as you can see here. So I decided, using a die set, a very small die, I made 2 little caps and 2 new neck bolts using some aluminum tubing. And they came out really nice, very clean, and I think a little bit more accurate than the ones that were sculpted. I simply put a little bit of putty in the holes and I was good to go. Now for the actual figure itself, I went ahead and I primed everything, including the figure. I did run out of gray primer, so for the head I just used some white primer on that. So here all the parts have been primed. Now I'm going to begin by painting the base. So I start by mixing a very dark brown that I'm going to use on all of the woodwork. I wanted to make a very dark chocolate brown, so I simply took the darkest color and I mixed it with a little bit of black, and I ended up with a very, very dark, I guess you'd call it almost like a German chocolate brown if you're into food references. And I simply began by brushing that onto the base. course, later on, as you'll see in the video, I do come back and I dry brush this. I'm going to begin the next phase, which was to dry brush the base, the wood tone, if you will. So I simply use a paper plate palette, say that 3 times fast, and a couple of different shades of brown. A little bit of orange, and just to sort of lighten it up a little bit, because you know, obviously dry brushing is a dark to light process, and I even used a little bit of white here. And of course, with dry brushing, you want to take off all the excess paint. You want very little paint on that brush, and you simply come back and you begin the dry brushing procedure all over the woodwork. And you want to try to work perpendicular so that you don't go into all the little nooks and crannies, because basically dry brushing is simply touching on the uppermost surfaces, the rough texture. The dry brushing is complete on the woodwork, and I'm going to begin painting the brickwork. Well, actually, I've already started painting the brickwork. The base coat of the dark red is on. Now I'm going to come back and using lighter shades of red, orange, a little bit of a pinkish red, and I'm going to dry brush the brick in various different shades. I want to vary the shade over the entire surface so that not all the bricks are a uniform color. So I simply vary the color as I'm dry brushing. I dip the paint, or rather dip the brush into the various colors so that I end up with a different shade every time I hit a couple of bricks or a brick or two. And this will, of course, vary the tone as we progress with the dry brushing here. And here you can see I've pretty much got the dry brushing done. And as you can see, the tones vary across the surface of the bricks for a more realistic effect. And here I've got the base finished. I painted the moss. I started with a very dark green, and then I came back with a lighter shade of green. Now, starting with the figure, I began with these 3 colors. I used a gray-green, pale flesh, and a medium flesh. And the first thing was to mix up this grayish-green color, or a very pale green. It looks almost like pea soup. And here's the head with the pale green airbrushed onto it. Next, come back with the very pale flesh tone, and I just airbrush that over the highlights of the face. Then I came back with some pastel chalks, blue and red, and here I simply used some of the chalks, as you can see here, around the eyes, any of the little crevices. That gives it a little bit more of an undead sort of look, almost like there's lividity in his skin. Did some bruising effects around the fingers, around the backs of the hands, the veins. I painted the fingernails black. Once all the clothing was painted a flat black, I then came back and I dry brushed the clothing. Here's another close-up of the moss, and here's the final model.